Hello, PerfBytes listeners. Before we begin, please take a moment to listen to a word from our sponsors.
Whether you want to load test your APIs or your browser-based applications, you need to be able to easily scale up volume and identify problem areas. SmartBear has you covered. LoadUI is the rock star of API load testing. Using an intuitive, versatile design, LoadUI gives you the power to scale up and out, letting you dial up high volume and real-world load from any number of local and remote computers, all within a single test environment. With LoadUI, it's easy to create and configure tests, incorporating all of your operating system, application, and database statistics agentlessly. It's fully interactive, too, so you can easily modify your tests and fix errors on the fly. Load Complete is an astonishingly easy-to-use load testing tool for HTML, AJAX, and rich internet applications. Create and run automated load tests in just minutes using a browser to naturally record your interactions with the website or application. You can scale up the number of virtual users, pull in data from Excel or other data sources, monitor server resources during test execution, and even distribute your test geographically. Load Complete's reports and charts make it a breeze to explore aspects of how your site or app performs under pressure and ultimately pinpoint performance issues proactively. LoadUI and Load Complete by SmartBear ensure outstanding performance across your entire web stack.
It's time for PerfBytes.
What the is PerfBytes? The fourth square meal of the day. Don't bogart the PerfBytes. Up waffles. Microwave ready. Blah blah blah. Add nutritional value to your brain. It's time for PerfBytes with your hosts Mark Tomlinson, James Pulley, and Howard Chorney. PerfBytes.
Whatever.
Hey, PerfBytes listeners. It's Mark Tomlinson here with your multi-perplexed and binary accelerated hosts, Howard Chorney and James Pulley. And, of course, joining me in today's show is a return of a very special guest who's recently also returned to the independent performance consulting world. It's the tone hog himself, also known as the load tester, Scott Moore. Scott, welcome back to PerfBytes. It's great to have you here, man.
Hey, Mark, it's good to be back.
Very cool. And you've been doing more than just load testing, right? You've been getting back into lots of things in music too, right?
Yes, I've been doing some audio production here at my home studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, and not country music, thank God, but doing a lot of rock stuff. I
will never forget being there as we were listening to what was the guy's name? The really awesome guitar player.
Johnny Hyland.
We just went and saw Johnny Hyland, and it was he's such an impressive guitar player, but I remember you turning me and say, all right, we can leave anytime you want. It's going to take me like a week's worth of listening to Black Sabbath to get this out of my head.
Yeah, I love Johnny, and I've actually talked to him recently, and he's a great guy. But the whole chicken picking thing is so complicated for me because they play it a different way. They play a lot with the right hand and fingernails and stuff. And, I'm just used to watching Jimi Hendrix play with his front teeth.
It's not, and he was not a chicken picker by any image. But also in your copious downtime, you've also been doing a little bit of research on today's topic, which is HTTP2, which is very exciting. So thank you. And you posted an article. We'll share the link out on LinkedIn to that. But, of course, also in the background are my other standby steadfast host, James Pulley and Howard Chorney. Howard, how are you up there in Boston? You're probably still buried under a bunch of snow, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. There's just a gajillion feet of snow on the ground. And by the way, interesting fact, Toy Codwell of the Marshall Tucker Band was a hell of a chicken pecker.
Yes, I think that's true. But I'm not sure he wasn't a hybrid picker, though, I don't think. He was still sort of classic country picking.
Absolutely.
So Howard, is that a pass off to me in the Carolinas since the Marshall Tucker Band kind of came out of this area?
Well, yes, James, that could be an excellent one. And where in the Carolinas were the Marshall Tucker Band from, James?
Ooh, now you're going to put me on the spot. I think it was Spartanburg.
Well, that's absolutely correct, my friend. From Spartanburg, South Carolina, the Marshall Tucker Band.
And would you take a guess where I was born, Howard?
Wait, James, were you born in Spartanburg?
I was.
Hot damn.
Well, at least one good thing came out of Spartanburg. We'll leave it at that.
You're good too, James. Not just the Marshall Tucker Band.
I don't rise to that level. Yeah.
But here's the point that you might not understand is that James probably has a lovely singing voice, and he probably in Spartanburg could be the love child from maybe a late night visit with after backstage with the Marshall Tucker Band.
I can confirm, knowing my parents, that's not possible.
That's not possible. No, okay, we won't go there. So everyone, this is a great opportunity for us to dig into a topic that I know Scott's been wanting to talk about with us for quite a while, and now that he's back out on the scene and posting things about this HTTP2, let's talk about what this is, sort of the background and basics of this fundamental change in the specification for the protocol that supports every web app on the planet. And so really, Scott, maybe giving us the basics of how did we get to HTTP2 from good old HTTP 1.0 and 1.1?
Okay, sure. It kind of got on my radar when I saw that LoadRunner 12 announced support for a new protocol called SPDY, SPDY, which I had not heard of. So kind of raised my eyebrow. I said, let's do some research on this, and found out that as any good project starts off with, if you have a company with as much money as God, like Google, you can spin off some people and have some time to say, hey, let's make some things better here. Look at HTTP 1.1 and let's see if we can do some things better, faster. Can we improve it? So SPDY was basically that. It was a research project that Google did. I think they started it in 2009. They first introduced it, and of course Chrome was the first browser to start supporting it. And apparently they had some success because HTTP2 was basically what SPDY version 2 was going to be.
Right.
And so it was the improvements over HTTP 1.1 that I guess the powers that be said this is worth checking out. And I guess you could think of SPDY as HTTP2's father.
HTTP2, I am your father.
Thank you. So Howard, as we look at Google versus Microsoft in a vendor war over this, I think it's the question is this HTTP2 the same as SPDY 2.0? Is it actually the same thing or no?
I think it is the same thing. There is a big, massive political battle over it, though.
Yeah, we can get into that in part 2. So as SPDY takes the next step and becomes SPDY 2.0, it became so popular that, here, as you point out, Scott, Google creates it, and then Microsoft, I see, also starts to support it. If your default install of 8.1 and you start going to some Microsoft sites, you'll see little pop-ups that say, this site supports the SPDY protocol. So now you got Microsoft chasing Google's tail, and then the minute Microsoft comes out and supports SPDY, then Google says, well, let's go create SPDY.2, and now there's HTTP2, which so we just the vendor competition keeps growing and growing.
Yeah. He who defines the nature of the engagement usually wins. So I give this one to Google.
Give this one to Google. Ha ha. Ding ding.
I have to agree with James on that.
I think we've been giving a lot to Google lately, to tell you the truth. They've certainly been cutting edge.
In the modern era of people doing performance testing, and maybe they're recording from the UI, they're using TrueClient, they're using Selenium to push load, they're doing things that are in the UI. There's a lot of folks that might be doing some kind of performance analysis on the front end, and they don't really understand even really what HTTP as a protocol is. And so we'll get into that. But as a spec, just so everyone knows, almost all of your browser-based applications and normal desktop applications or mobile applications that speak across the web over HTTP. In the web services, our recent episode on web services, we talked about SOAP or REST-based services going over HTTP. That protocol is an agreement in between vendors, and the reason we talk about Microsoft or Google or Mozilla or Apple in the Safari world, all these different browsers have to sort of agree, hey, this is how we're going to have a protocol to translate and move web docs. This is the way we do it. Which brings me to the point of talking about sort of the W3C. And I'm still sort of listening in and not super participating on the web performance working group that's part of the W3C. And we do things like navigation timings and other things for instrumenting and educating on top of the protocol. And I don't have an answer yet whether some of the things from the W3C for web performance have made it into this new HTTP2 spec. But Scott, did you find that the W3C or the IEEE kind of world, are they actually on board with this?
They are. I believe that just went into their inbox or outbox this week. The last approval was, is it the IETF?
Yes.
I believe is what it's called. They went on board with it this week. So this is something brand new.
So they've been working on it for a while. James, you found, what was the comment about the IETF?
I'm not sure about a comment from the IETF, but speaking to some of your navigation timings and other items from the Web Performance Working Group at the W3C, it seems like a lot of those have such a high client basis to them. You know, focusing on rendering, page development, things of that nature. That this is very different from all of those front end type questions that people are trying to answer. And this is definitely a way to improve the efficiency of the transport, maybe with some trade-offs in some other areas.
Right. That makes perfect sense, I think, in terms of, but still the spec on different parts, people are deciding, like with Mr. Souders and the guys at Fastly, that are, these are front-end types of optimizations that allow the browser spec to actually behave better in rendering. This is a similar kind of improvement that happens on the wire, so to speak. So I think the other background that would be interesting is, like, Scott, really, when you looked at how this impacts people a little bit, there's this, for a normal browser app, tomorrow people aren't going to wake up and suddenly everything's broken and it doesn't work. This isn't a protocol that invades things through a Windows update or something like that.
No, I think this was one of the dependencies upon approval, that it had to be somewhat backwards compatible with 1.1, which it does. It plays well with it. But to the average user, will they see the big difference, as soon as they start using it? Probably not. They're probably not going to know any different. And would they care? Probably not. People like us, though, I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah, especially if you're, as we get into talking about load testing tools and scripting at the transport level, this could be quite disruptive if you don't figure out how to handle it.
Go ahead,
Howard. Yeah.
Just a comment. HTTP2 leaves most of the HTTP 1.1 high-level syntax alone, such as methods, status codes, header fields, and URLs. So we really shouldn't see much of a difference at all between 2 and 1.1.
2 and 1. For people that never considered going to Speedy in their app, they could probably move to a new platform such as the Windows Server 10 and start doing things in that world, or even Apache being able to support it on the front end of any of the web adapters that go in there. I also thought there may be some connection, Howard, to sort of mobile apps or apps of any kind that are non-browser-based apps that don't inherit the connection infrastructure or the HTTP stack from the browser, where they're maybe rolling something directly on their own TCP/IP stack or their own HTTP stack or just the OS. Is this HTTP2 actually more relevant for these non-browser type of apps?
I really don't think it's going to affect the non-browser apps. I think that may be one of the criticisms too.
Yeah.
Although we will talk about that more in part 2.
All right, very, very good. Scott, anything else you would like to share on the background of HTTP2 before we move on?
No, I think we've summed it up pretty well. I'm good. I'm ready to talk about the problems with HTTP 1.
So we'll take a break from the sponsor, and then we'll come right back and start digging into the problems with HTTP 1.
Hosting for PerfBytes.com has been provided by NewCo, New Centers of Excellence in Performance Engineering. The Script Farm, LoadRunner by the Hour, Cloud Architect, Idaratech, and LightSquare. For more information, please visit the website at www.newcoe.com or call 888-212-1104.
So Howard, let's talk a little bit about, sort of the general, what's the real difference here over HTTP 1.1? And I think Scott was itching to jump in and start commenting on what the heck is really wrong with HTTP 1.
Well, let's talk about one of the big differences, and that's multiplexing through a single connection to the origin, allowing multiple request and response messages to be in flight at the same time, which means that URL sharding is completely dead. And it might really be great to a single connection app like a mobile app. Scott, what do you think about that?
Well, if you think that domain sharding or URL sharding is something that happens by accident to a guy who's gotten too many domains registered, you might be a performance engineer. I actually thought that was something different. I had to look up what that actually was again. But no, I think that my biggest contention is we look at GT metrics, we look at Y slow, we look at all these things that we've had to do over these years to turn a textual protocol into something that I don't think anybody envisioned is what the web was going to be in 2015, what it was in 1994. So they've had to do all these workarounds. And so when you get the sharding, you got the sprites. The last time I talked to a company about using sprites to make their website faster, the guy went, "Sprites, never had it, never will." You know, that's the kind of reaction you get. So, I mean, these are things that we won't have to worry about maybe with two.
I still think there's good design and good reasons to use things like sprites, even with what's coming with HTTP2, including this server push model. Instead of having to push 15 different graphics, push one. So you still have some efficiency gains there. But what I really like about HTTP2 is it continues and expands the pipelining model of HTTP 1.1. 1.1, it was kind of a serial push of request and response across an open connection. But here now you've got a multiplexed connection where essentially you have all of your request and response interleave. So I think there's some efficiency gain there, but I think there's some drawbacks, and we'll kind of get into that maybe in the next section.
Well, let's just keep, while we're talking about server push, I mean, that was going to be one of the things that we definitely want to talk about. And the advantage of HTTP2 is the server push allows the server to avoid additional round trips by pushing the responses it thinks the client will need to its cache. So there's going to be less round trip app turns, which is a great advantage of using server pushes. So more of the work gets done on the CPU versus at the browser itself. Now, of course, there'll be disadvantages of that, which we'll talk about in a minute. But, Scott, do you have any comments on server push?
Well, I mentioned in the article that it's kind of similar where CPUs are kind of waiting on an instruction before they make a decision when they reach a fork in the road. And faster processors just go down both paths. When they finally get the instructions, they forget the path they didn't need and move on. And I think this is kind of a similar technique to that, saying the server already knows what the browser really needs. It knows what the links are and the resources that are going to be requested from that HTML. So why not go ahead and start sending that down ahead of time, instead of waiting on the next request to do so.
Yeah. So versus an old HTTP1 model where I'm going to send the client an HTML, and then it's your responsibility as the client to parse it and then start requesting things from me, even though I know what I sent you.
Right.
And Mark, parsing is the key item here. Essentially, we've moved parsing to the server. What I would like to see on the web servers is some sort of parse cache, like we have a query plan cache in databases.
Oh, yeah.
So that we don't have to constantly parse all the pages and take that CPU hit and then make the decision on what to send downstream. We got to look at some efficiencies there. And I think that's going to require some revs to actual web server architecture in order to have that kind of planned cache in that case to get the efficiencies.
What about the impact to the way an HTTP1 app works with a CDN in a system distributed cache like that, where you've got, okay, now the server knows it's going to send it. It's maybe there's things it's going to say, well, I'm not going to send that because I know you're going to go to Akamai to get that.
Well, Mark, that brings up a really good question because I was kind of wondering how this is going to affect the use of a CDN. Mm-hmm. I mean, a CDN today does a lot of, doing all that caching. It's definitely the way HTTP 1.1 helps get data across to the user a lot faster, right, because you're not having to go all the way across to your origin to get the information, so you can just go to the CDN to get it.
Yeah, but it's going to break the model of the client making the request and then being satisfied by the CDN. Right. The CDN is going to have to intercept and figure out how to push in stream.
Or the server is going to be smart enough. Like, let's say somebody doesn't know what's going to be served from the CDN. And Scott, what do you think if like one of the things a good tester would do to say, well, what's the let's check the server log and see what it's pushing. And if you're pushing if you're doing a server push of static content, that's a big no-no. I mean, that's like, that's kind of one way you'd be able to monitor it. Whereas in an HTTP1, in a pipelining model, you can't see that.
Right. And I think where we've seen all of the emphasis on this is on the browser client. We haven't seen the server vendors really started up with any of this. So I think server push is something that's definitely going to have to be tweaked over the next year or 2 years as we see new versions, server OSs, web server versions, the mods. And I think it's going to get better and faster as they learn how to tweak it. But that's where most of the development needs to be done right now.
Howard, what else we got?
Header compression, right? Another beautiful thing about HTTP2 is header compression. It's going to shrink things like user agent from 24 bytes to 9. So that's really a wonderful thing. So you won't have to have your headers repeat over and over and over and over again.
Headers are mandatory too.
Absolutely.
100 round trips for HTTP. Every one of them has this the same freaking headers over and over and over. It's a lot of wasted data being sent back and forth.
So it's going to add, it adds a lot more to your payload footprint too, as you send your packets over the wire. So it's by eliminating those, it certainly helps in that area.
Right. Now, this was part of SPDY, Scott, as I understood it, the getting to multiplexing, where I didn't have to make independent connections for the repeated data overhead of headers and other things. So combine header compression with multiplexing. The one thing we haven't talked about yet is the idea that this is binary, that there's some binary encoded stuff that's not clear in here. And we were even searching to figure out what the encode format or what the scheme was. What do you know about the whole binary stuff within HTTP2?
When you're talking about header compression, though, we get back to just a brief discussion about what it's doing there, because, and you guys probably know this, just doing this for your listeners, in each side, the client and the server side, there's a locally held buffer, right? So one side is sending the other side information, but if it already has that information on the other side, all it has to do is send a reference to it, right? Ooh. That's how gzip and all that works. And they compare these two buffers. So the very first time that this header is sent, there won't be any compression. But then the second and third and fourth will obviously be very compressed because most of that information is the same. But it doesn't mean that if something does change, if an image or something that's more dynamic, the content needs to be updated, it's still going to pull that down for that request or make a new request that's not going to have compression. You see what I'm saying? So that will get better as well over time. So that I know that's what HPAC really is.
Yeah. Don't you guys think that to me that sounds more like not just compression, it's like acceleration and compression in the same thing.
Well, it is part of compression is a part of an accelerator.
But the whole, like you say, Scott, the checking of, have I already sent this? You already have it. I'll just send you a reference, which is much smaller than the actual data. To me, that's like WAN acceleration kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it evokes kind of like a riverbed type scheme where we're sending a reference to a 64K packet as opposed to the full 64K piece of it.
Didn't I just say that? Compression's part of a WAN accelerator?
Something like that, Howard. But, when you say it, it sounds different than when Scott and James talk.
Okay.
That's because he's from Boston.
Exactly. So the WAN accelerator.
I'll just mention this on GitHub, for the HTTP2 page on GitHub. It asks the question, why is HTTP2 binary? And it says that binary protocols are more efficient to parse, more compact on the wire, and more importantly, they are much less error prone compared to a textual protocol like HTTP 1.x. Yep. They both have a number of affordances to help with things like white space handling, capitalization, line endings, blank lines, and so on. But they mentioned that HTTP 1.1 defines 4 different ways to parse a message versus HTTP 2, which only has one path.
So even just in breaking apart the message, it's simpler because there's less options. You just do one thing. So you cut out the overhead. Right.
So the method they use, I'm not sure of, but that's the reason why they chose to do that.
Right. Cool. Well, next in the next section, we'll talk more about the tools and stuff. But I think to me, that's if I were a vendor building test tools or network sniffing tools or things like that, the binary nature of this is going to be, it's not a complicated hurdle, but it's going to be a hurdle to what people have built in their tools, the ability to decode and be able to let real end users sniff and see things that are happening or record and replay.
Like WAN accelerators?
Maybe. No, not WAN acceleration, Howard, just compression.
I just like saying WAN accelerator.
Exactly. So, Howard, there's some people have made some criticisms. I know you did some research.
Oh yeah, I love criticisms. So
yes, it's not all rainbows and unicorns here.
No, it's not. There's some voodoo that you could be actually stepping into here, and one of the big criticisms is that it's being criticized for not supporting opportunistic encryption.
What does that mean, really?
What does that mean?
What the hell does that mean?
So that I think that's encryption on an individual request basis as opposed to enforcing encryption along the entire connection. And this is something that came out of SPDY, where if you notice, Google made an announcement, maybe it was about a year ago, that they were going to give higher rankings to sites that used encryption as a default. And since SPDY came out of Google, this kind of makes sense. It would support their overall philosophy of, hey, we want you to be encrypted. And by the way, we sell certificates.
Right.
Opportunistic encryption's been around for a little while, right? And definitely more robust. I mean, SMTP uses opportunistic encryption, correct?
And no one ever hacks your email, right?
No, never. So here's another thing.
Hang on. Before we leave security, I know, Scott, in your paper, you also mentioned that you can have something now with HTTP2. You're not sometimes when we add security or extra security into an app stack within the communication protocols, it's always perceived as being slower, or in many cases is slower. What you had written is something that maybe we don't have to make that compromise anymore.
Yeah, it's the fact that this same single connection that you're going to have to the server when the initial handshake is made, it is keeping it from going back and forth to determine should it support HTTP2, should it be encrypted. All of that's handled within the first handshake. The client is requesting, I want security to be turned on. I'm HTTP2. Can you support it? The server says, yes, I can. Let's go. And you're off and running at that point. What I'm being told is that encrypted traffic from HTTP2 should be faster than non-encrypted traffic from HTTP 1.
And it's like to your comment in the paper, it really gets after this single establishment of a TLS secure tunnel that everything gets streamed through. And if it's streamed in a binary fashion, encrypted, binary, and encrypted, it would be much smaller and much more consistent and easier to flow as a stream.
Correct. And the thought behind this single connection is it's better to have one single connection going as fast as it possibly can, keeping that connection busy on both sides, than having 8 connections now that are going, a third of the speed.
Yeah. I'll give a little example in the file copying world. If you've ever copied a directory with like load runner results with like 10,000 little files, and it takes forever to copy that across the wire from one machine to another. But if you zip that folder up into a single, not just size, let's say you did minimal compression, and it was still a 500 meg file in a single zip archive, and you copy that across the wire, when it actually opens up and copies that, it'll actually copy it a lot faster, even just to USB. The idea that you're not doing repeated overhead of handshaking, or as you point out, Howard, app turns. Yeah, I have to constantly open and tear down round trips back and forth versus open up one connection and stream and multiplex all that response back down to the client.
And, app turns over long distances cause long delays in your ability to render content.
Very bad. James, Howard, what other criticisms did we come up with here?
Well, here's a good one. This may take load off of your network, but it could put more load on your server because you're going to be doing more in the CPU.
What are we going to be doing in the CPU? I thought this was all magic HTTP2 happy land.
No.
Oh no, you're gonna be parsing the pages.
I thought the client did that. No, the client's not going to do that anymore.
No.
Oh, see that's where you get that predictive type of analysis where we're going to say, hey, we've got the page. Now we're going to send all the page components to you because we know you need them because that's what's on the page. How do you know what's on the page? Well, you got to parse the page.
Yeah. So that's going to put a hit on your web server, your app server, so you might add another node. I bet there's a lot of people in the cloud thinking, oh, big deal. We'll just throw another image at it. We're elastic, dude. No worries.
Yeah. They charge for every CPU cycle at Amazon. Didn't they tell you?
Oh, do you have stock in Amazon? That would be good. They're going to make a lot more money.
Yeah, there's another thing, kind of going on the money and the cost thing. The present CERT model isn't really compatible with small devices like routers either.
Okay.
Howard, if I understand what you were saying, it is that all of your HTTP proxy servers and their certificates, there's some upgrade of infrastructure that needs to take place here because if your proxy is only 1.1, you're probably not going to get very far in the negotiation for an HTTP2 connection.
Absolutely.
You get to have that infrastructure in place. Am I hearing you?
Yeah, that's going to be nuts. And you think about an internal IT with people with VIPs, cert backs, and secondary certs running everywhere around on an HTTP or HTTPS cert. That's all based on 1.1.
Yeah, and these fees are not trivial either. No. So the certs aren't cheap. So it's definitely going to add more cost, at least up front.
All right, that might be a little bit of a barrier there.
Yeah. So tell that to your IT manager.
Yeah.
Hey, it's going to be faster, but it's going to cost you a lot more money now. So actually, Scott, I don't know if you've really done anything on this or if anyone has, but just think about it. Has anyone done any ROI studies on going to HTTP2?
I haven't seen any out there in the wild yet. I know that there's just been a few people talking about they've seen up to 40% of an increase in their applications. However, that was Google who said that.
And I'll bet it was Agile developers as
Probably.
well.
And independently, they've seen about 20% or more of an increase. So.
That's in speed. But we don't know if that 20%. I love this part of the argument. I don't know if this 20% is worth the money it's going to cost to do it, at least in the near term.
This is something I actually wrote another article about, believe it or not, just today about when business decisions need to trump performance-based decisions from the geeks. Yeah. There are absolutely good reasons and right reasons not to implement performance improvements. So, and this could very well be one of those, at least in the short term, until we can see what it's going to do.
Very cool. All right, we'll take a little break for a public service announcement. And which one do we want?
Play the commercial.
Hi, honey. I'm home.
Hey, you don't sound too good. What's up?
Yeah, not 100% today. My boss says I'm not performing at my peak today.
Not performing at your peak? Feeling like you're a website that crashes on a daily basis? Perhaps you need to tune your system up in the morning with a hearty breakfast. The best way to tune your system is to start the morning off with a heaping helping of PerfBytes cereal. PerfBytes is the cereal for the adult on the go. PerfBytes are a little bit of performance goodness with the flavor of a wonderful single malt scotch that will get you up and running to start your day. PerfBytes contains 100% of your daily FDA nutritional requirements. Plus, it packs the punch of a single malt to make your day even more enjoyable. Just add some ice and woohoo, you're ready to go. Heck, even if you're having a sluggish day after the first bowl of PerfBytes, just have a couple of extra bowls and you won't care about the rest of your day anyway.
Hi, honey. I'm home.
Did you have a better day today?
Heck yeah. Give me another bowl of those PerfBytes.
PerfBytes, the official cereal of Mark and James, and if you're a teetotaler like Howard, try the new PerfBytes Light. All the flavor of our original PerfBytes cereal without the potential for the slurred speech. Caution, PerfBytes are not for anyone under 21 years of age. After eating PerfBytes in the morning, it is recommended that you either take the bus, take the train, or let someone else drive you to work. And remember, start your morning off with that delicious, nutritious cereal called PerfBytes.
All right, so let's go into part 3, James, where we talk a little bit more about how this is really going to impact folks in their load testing. I mean, when and how are they going to start being impacted by this?
Well, here's where the rubber meets the road, Mark. Friends don't let friends deploy without testing. What tools are available to actually do this? Now, Scott, you mentioned that you came across this because you saw a reference to Speedy in the LoadRunner 12 release. Well, NeoLoad is already there, and I think there's some other tools that are on the way for Speedy, but there's nothing in the market today that has direct HTTP2 support.
Come on, James. Don't say others. Say Cloud Test. Come on.
Cloud Test, Bartow did confirm with the PM that Cloud Test does have support for Speedy, just like 12. So I think
okay, so Cloud Test is there, but no one is there with HTTP2 is the point.
That's correct.
So we got a plugin for Wireshark so we can sniff it on the wire and we can decode it and things of that nature. But that's about it.
Well, I'm going to give a shout. I'm not patting myself on the back for prioritizing in LoadRunner 11 the data format extensions. But those little tricks, the instrumentation of a record chain and a replay chain in LoadRunner, it's an advanced feature. I think you could use the DFEs and write a DFE that actually decodes HTTP2. If we knew what it was, I might get $10 that says it's just base 64 because that's the most common one, as we've talked about before. So I'm wondering if there isn't some really easy way to use a DFE in LoadRunner to do the decode and re-encode, and you would pretty much have support for it.
I would be willing to bet that's exactly what LoadRunner development is going to do. They're going to start with that foundation of the DFE to write whatever extension is required. But the point is, the spec was just baked a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for the tool vendors to say, "Oh yeah, we support it. It came out on Thursday and it's Saturday. Oh yeah, we support it.
No problem."
No problem. Even if you look at the open source universe, the JMeters, the grinders, things of that nature, they're still challenged with just representing the behavior of existing browsers in some respects. For the multi-threaded download model. So when you throw HTTP2 at them, what are we going to see there? I think the gulf is going to be even larger because the commercial tools actually have the engineering talent to go ahead and invest in building this stuff out. The open source universe is going to have to wait until someone demands it.
Yeah.
So let's put our reality check hats on here for a minute, right? I mean, come on. The protocol just came out this week. What's today? The 23rd? All right. Last week. Well, today's the 26th, 5th, whatever. So it came out last week, right? So seriously, how long do we think it's going to take for wide adoption of this protocol anyways?
I'll say from the internal view, from seeing the sausage making of the LoadRunner team, which was great sausage, by the way. It could be something where there really isn't much change to make, but you do have to do a QA pass. So it could come out in a dot release, a service pack, or a patch of some of that kind. But you have to go through some QA. If it's a very big change, meaning they need to actually change some serious parts of the assembly within LoadRunner's delivery for the protocol, then that's going to change.
But Mark, I'm not just talking adoption from a tools vendor's perspective. I'm talking about just adoption throughout the industry.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, I think we're years.
There's got to be a customer demand.
Exactly.
For this. There's got to.
It's going to have to be an inertia, right? Where somebody says it's working so badly for us or poorly for us that we have to change, and many people will not until they have to.
Yeah. So, Scott, speaking of that, just and thank you for speaking up because it's a heated debate. I also, in terms of adoption, we already mentioned that some folks that have been testing normal web browsers in the HTTP 1.1 world and their apps are fine. If they start moving on platforms and they don't use HTTP2, it is reverse compatible.
To the extent that they can still use the same calls and requests and methods, yes. It is. It's not going to break.
Yeah, so it should.
Yeah, Scott, you mentioned that negotiation right up front. Are you HTTP2 compatible or 1.1 or 1.0? Because that negotiation handshake still happens today for servers for 1.0 to 1.1. If it simply just doesn't respond that I have 2 and it says 1.1, there's no difference.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder, however, though, if you take a front-end client that's talking maybe to like a portal that's talking to multiple different web servers, and you got one web app that's talking to and another one that's talking 1.1, is if you've got a script that you recorded at the transport level and it's filled, how do you mix them? And that'll be a challenge maybe for a tool vendor to, I've got one script that talks to two different sites, two different URLs, two different origins. And can I use both HTTP1 and HTTP2 in a web virtual user or a web script of some sort? Or do I have to do two separate scripts and sync them up and rendezvous them and use some VTS between them and stuff? I mean, this could, if you had to support a hybrid thing, that could be really complicated.
And I still think you're years away before you're even going to see that.
And I think that's got to come down to the client specification as well. Does the client allow multiple versions? Because I think today, if you have multiple sites, you can actually do a negotiated 1.0 on one site if that exists, and a 1.1 on a second site, because your request streams are completely different. You know, it's kind of the old Ghostbusters don't cross the streams. I think there's a potential, if we look at that as precedent, I think that, yes, you could have a 2.0 on one site and a 1.1 on another, but the client has got to become more sophisticated for that one.
What about monitoring, James? Is that going to change at all?
Oh, I think so. As we are taking the load off the network, we've referenced it a couple of times, we're going to push the load internally. Whereas today, CPUs are not hit that hard. You've got a lot of co-processed network cards. You've got co-processed disk subsystems, and that's really where the main thrust has been on web servers. As you go to page parsing and predictive pushing and things of that nature, you're going to get a higher hit on the CPU, and you're going to have to watch those very carefully in this case.
Yeah, I think that'd be crazy.
Again, ROI, it's still going to bring up that. I'm going to be on record on the ROI argument.
Howard, to this also in terms of monitoring, I mean, we should be seeing what we could be all of this network optimization because we're moving less data. We're now compressing it. We're compressing the headers. It's binary. People monitoring their networks during a load test or in their architecture, they should be seeing that improvement probably most obviously in network usage, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the footprint should go down, right? Because you're handling more at the CPU, you're pushing less data across. So I think from a bandwidth perspective, you're going to get a lot of advantage. And of course, as we kept saying with, app turns and data going across the wire, it will definitely limit some of the problems you'll be seeing from a latency perspective.
Yeah, but there's also an assumption there that your CDN layer is also upgraded to HTTP2, and everybody chats together.
Well, this comes to that whole other ROI argument again. How much is it going to cost for the CDN vendors to start changing all their stuff around?
Yeah, if at all.
There could be some real resistance here.
Scott, the other thing I wanted to bring up was changing people's approach if they're doing web services-based testing. And we were talking about a little bit before the show, in terms of these calls being sent back and forth. Web services calls are they going to have to run on HTTP2? Is that going to really make a big difference?
That's going to be that's a good one. I think what we're looking at with a web service call, though, they're still going to be single request, right? It's going to be much like how SOAP operates today.
Yeah,
I don't know that that's going to change that much. James, you feel the same way about that?
Well, I think there's some benefit for those asynchronous web services calls for multiplexing the data that's coming back in stream with other data which is non-asynchronous in nature. So I can see a benefit there on the efficiency on the coming back of a mixed synchronous and asynchronous request environment. But that's about the only one that I really see as a benefit for web services. Howard, what are your thoughts?
I don't have any.
Howard, just say ROI.
Yeah, it's all about ROI.
It's ROI.
It is all.
Really.
Come on, you may bust my chops about it, but you know something, gentlemen. I'm on the business side. I've been on the business side for a long time, and I understand the ROI piece, and I understand what the resistance is going to be. So
it's a chant: ROI, ROI, ROI.
ROI.
No,
tease me. I don't care.
Oh, I totally get it. I was just going back to the fact that HTTP2, though, has been described as an asynchronous protocol.
Yeah. So, and that may simply be because of the multiplexing architecture that it got from Speedy. Because Speedy was like, you can make one request and get asynchronously get all this other stuff back on the same channel.
Yep.
Yep. That makes perfect sense. So I think we covered a lot. Scott, I want to thank you definitely for jumping in and getting us to finally talk about this. We also should, next time we should talk with you about WebSockets. Actually, Dan Bartow started saying, hey, this is similar to how we support streaming across WebSockets. So maybe we need to do a show with you on WebSockets as well. And that would be really cool. But before, as we encourage people to, we'll post the link and go out to your LinkedIn page. Maybe some closing thoughts, Scott, on what you'd like people to take away from the article.
I just think that it needs to be taken seriously. If we could see a 30 to 40% increase in performance and the cost, as we were talking about, the ROI is actually there. This could be an actual game changer because it fundamentally changes the way data is being passed back and forth between a web server and a client. So that's my thoughts. I'd like to see where this goes. And obviously, we are on the cutting edge. We're talking about the cutting edge right now, the bleeding edge, and that's where I want to be. So there's going to be blood, but I want to get in and start testing this stuff, and let's see what happens in the lab.
Bring some Band-Aids.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Exactly. James, closing thoughts.
Well, you may be surprised, Mark, but I'm suspicious.
No, you're reticent?
Yeah, I'm reticent. Yeah, I think this seems a lot like we're trading one resource for another. I mean, granted, we're trading an expensive resource in the form of network for one that's less expensive on the CPU, but I think there's a chance we might overload the CPU. And I think there's a big risk because this requires a large infrastructure upgrade, as Howard noted, and that's going to take support from a lot of vendors. And there's been a lot of patches to HTTP 1.1 to make it perform pretty well. And a lot of this architecture for HTTP2 is going to have to be rethought in that sense. So Howard, what are your thoughts?
ROI. No, actually, my thoughts are HTTP2 helps the performance over the network. Yeah, one thing it really hasn't done is anything new for network security. Yep. Okay, so. I'm the performance guy. Yes, I love it and everything else. But I'm also Mr. Paranoia when it comes to security. And the hackers are out there. They're getting smarter all the time. They keep getting after our data no matter what. And the fact that HTTP2 didn't do anything to address any additional security would be a concern of mine.
Yeah, we'll see how the security stuff whirls out of this for sure. I think
ROI.
And ROI, the ROI. Thank you, ROI Parrot. Howard, in my perspective, we were talking to Dan Bartow from SOSTA in the products group. We know folks in the load runner world. We should ping Shane and see what he says about it on that one thread we had going on Facebook. We had a good thread going back and forth. Scott's starting some great conversations out there.
I'm the instigator.
You are. Just don't say the word ROI too often. But really, I think on this Speedy as well as HTTP2. Like anything, we talk about, getting after your test tool vendors, any testing tools, whether it's a load testing tool, a network sniffing tool, a proxy sniffing tool, the Fiddler guys, Charles Proxy, and other analysis tools that do the web performance stuff. The vendors need to jump on this sooner than later. But I'm with you guys. We don't want it to drop off their backlog, but yeah, we got to see some real customers, some big names and customers to pop up on the radar screen and say, you know what, I'm not going to renew my maintenance or buy your tool if you don't support this. And I'm kind of on the fence. It could be a game changer. I think it's definitely one of the biggest things that we've seen in an industry specification that actually takes a huge step forward simply because it's faster. It's just like, this is better because it's faster. It's faster for mobile. It's faster. It's just faster. And that was the whole idea of why they called it Speedy. I like Speedy.
Hey, Mark, let's bring it down to what we originally talked about in the beginning about music. We can bring it back to music. Remember, there was a guy named Bach who came along and said, this is the way music has been done. This is the way it will be done. And he fundamentally changed music because of that. And then there was this other guy called T-Pain who brought auto-tune to the masses. So we just need to find out if this is going to be another Bach or another T-Pain.
It could be
If
T-Pain.
it is T-Pain,
Never
I'm
know.
just out of it.
Yes. As long as it could be Steve Vai, guitar-wise. That'd be very good. Okay, guys, so before we wrap up things here, I do want to share something very exciting, which was one of our listeners, Joshua Rector, has actually submitted the first listener-submitted perf-rant, and it's really quite good because, Howard, you're talking about ROI.
ROI.
So here's a perf-rant from Joshua Rector.
It's time for a perf rant.
You ever find that when someone asks for performance testing, they're really not asking for performance testing? They're really asking for something called performance testing so that they can say that they did something called performance testing. It's like they have these, the air quotes around performance testing when they ask for it. Usually the story goes something like this. Hey, Josh, we got that new feature that we're rolling into the application, and we need to make sure that that's going to meet the end user response time, expectations when we roll it out. So we need to do some quote performance testing to ensure that we meet the user's expectations. Well, that sounds reasonable, right? Yeah, sure. So tell me, where can we do this performance testing? Can we do that in a performance testing environment? Well, we don't have that dedicated performance testing environment. I know we've talked about that before, but right now, really, all we have is we have QA, and it's about 25% of prod. So we can just lower the user numbers, just divide them by 4, right? Well, what exactly does that 25% mean? Does it mean that we have 25% of the records in the database, or does it mean that we have 25% of the servers in the cluster, so we have 2 instead of 8, or does it mean that we have 1 core instead of quad core processors? Help me understand that. Well, Josh, you'll have to talk to the architect about that. I'm really just the project manager. I don't know, but they told me that it's 25% of prod, and so if we divide it by 4, we can just extrapolate our results right out of that. Well, I go through the whole hockey stick analogy and trying to explain that it's not linear math that we're talking about here when it comes to performance. Just because you get something at 25% doesn't mean that you're going to get 4 times that when you're at 100%. Not to mention the fact that we're not emulating the same number of connections, and so we eliminate any sort of connection pooling limitations or anything like that. I explain all that, and the answer usually goes, well, Josh, look, we got 2 weeks, okay? So what I need you to do is just get as much as you can get done, so that we can try and make some decisions on this new business process. Make sure it meets those expectations. So 2 weeks, okay? And by the way, for those 2 weeks, UAT is going to be running in the same environment. But I've got good news for you. You can start your scripting in Dev. Okay, so let's talk about that. So does Dev have the same data in the same database as maybe pre-prod or QA where we're going to execute this? Well, no, not exactly. I mean, it's definitely a smaller data set. Okay, well, what about the build? Or is Dev on the same build as QA? Well, no. Obviously, they're not on the same build because they're going to be doing their development work. But all the changes they're making are UI. So those won't impact your scripts anyway, right? So just go ahead and start scripting in Dev, and let's just see what we can get done out of that. So we start scripting in Dev, and a week later, what happens? Oh, hey, Josh, hey, guess what? We found out that UAT's really found a bunch of bugs. And so now instead of a week, instead of 2 weeks, you got 1 week. But you only have 3 tests to run, right? I mean, you only have the load test, the stress test, and the endurance test, right? And the longest one of those is 24 hours. So, I mean, you should be able to get that done in a week, right, without a problem. And so what do you know? We start running the load test. We find all kinds of issues. We never get to the stress test, and we certainly don't get to the endurance test, and we're working 75, 80 hours a week just trying to get this done, get some sort of meaningful result out of this, and the PM is just like riding us like crazy to get it done, and at the end of this you kind of go, did I really add any value here? Did I really do performance testing, or did I just do something called performance testing? Yeah, I think the value piece is optional.
All right, Scott, this is an awesome article. Thank you again. I just want to give a little shout out for different ways that folks can get a hold of you now as an independent consultant. You've got the first person I know using one of these alternative domains names. So it's Scott Moore.
Right, and there's no .com. I can't believe that, but it was available, so I took it.
Forget it's not .com. .consulting.
It's very cool.
We have to do that.
Yeah.
Well, there's also .guru, .ninja,
there's also .radio and stuff like that.
Ooh. All right, we may have to look at that. It'd be cool. Now, Scott, I follow you on Twitter at LoadTester, and you're still in the Twitterverse out there at LoadTester. Where else should people get a hold of you?
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, but if they just go to my main page, scottmoore.consulting, it's got it's just a one-page site, so it should be speedy. They can get all of my contact information there, and I write all of my articles right now on LinkedIn too, so
that'll be cool.
I'm easy to find.
Great. Are you got any dates coming up where you may be coming out? People can come see you and listen to a talk you're giving or anything like that?
I'm trying to invest my time right now in online webinars. I don't have any dates right now, but maybe by our next show I'll have something, and maybe I'll be at another conference soon. So
we'll have you come to STPCon down in the fall.
That would be great.
Wherever it is in the fall. It might be at Howard's house.
Yeah, it needs to be in Nashville. That way we can jam after the conference.
Come back to Nashville. Yeah. Well, PerfBytes listeners, once again, you've come to the close of another optimally compressed and multiplexed episode of PerfBytes. And as always, we'd like to thank all of you for taking time for listening to the show today.
Well, I'd like to say thanks to my faithful basset hound, Woody, for the funny stuff you did as part of the Chorney family. Rest in peace, old boy. It's only been a week, but we miss you a ton. And of course, as always, I'd love to say thank you to the dynamic Mrs. Chorney. I love you, dear.
Very nice.
Mom, thank you for tuning in and listening.
Because we know we have one listener, always.
Exactly.
Very good. Scott, who can you send some thanks out to?
My special wife, Cynthia, allowed me to do this, so I'm gracious, and she's a pretty good cook. So,
and isn't it nice when you're like hard work on a podcast and your wife or partner brings you a nice hot meal so you can keep talking and schmoozing while you're eating?
It is awesome.
It is. It's very nice. Of course, I will always give my thanks to the sexy Irish voice of PerfBytes, and the special thanks to our great sponsors, Smart Bear and Sosta, for their sponsorship and support of the PerfBytes show and the PerfBytes community. And of course, once again, Scott, thanks very much for being our guest of honor on this episode.
Today's show is powered by bunnies. Warm, fuzzy, lucky, turned into slippers, pink and polka dotted. Bunnies.
Remember, all of the content of this PerfBytes episode is copyrighted and protected by the West Texas jackalope. It may look like a fuzzy bunny, but it wears the horns, especially during the fall rut when the male jackalopes compete for the attention of the female jackalopes. Yahoo, baby! Ride 'em, jackalope!
For more information about PerfBytes, please visit the show's website, www.perfbytes.com, or follow us on the Twitter and the Facebook. And of course, you can always subscribe and listen to the PerfBytes podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and testingpodcast.com. Just open your favorite listening app.
And don't forget Jackalope Radio, baby.
And search for PerfBytes. Click the subscribe button or favorites button or whatever button you have. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark at this point.
Don't forget the jackalope button.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. And please keep in mind that the PerfBytes show and staff are supporters of the Practical Performance Analyst and Performance Engineering Book of Knowledge, the Computer Measurement Group, the Workshop on Performance and Reliability, and of course, the Software Test Professionals community of software testers. And of course, we hope to see you at the next STPCon conference in April of 2014 in San Diego. Check out more at www.stpcon.com. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you on the next episode of PerfBytes. Bye, y'all.
Yahoo! Got him, jackalope. Got him, jackalope.